Well, how are we doing on this Monday? It is Monday, right? Oh yeah, it is. It is. We have a good weekend. Any big highlights? Those at home or anything here? Any big highlights that you can properly share?
I went for a 9-mile bike ride on Saturday.
Oh. What was that?
I went for a 9-mile bike ride on Saturday.
9-mile bike ride. Way to go. Way to go. Was it like mountain biking?
Just suburban.
Okay, cool. My wife is in, she's an avid biker as well, and she's doing the 30-day challenge for the month of April, which means, every day she needs to ride at least 10 minutes. And last year she rode, I think it was 300 miles for April. So her goal is 400 miles. In her heyday, she would easily go out and go for 35, 40 miles. Easily. She'd go up and down, the St. Croix River Valley, go from where we live all the way up to close to Taylor Falls and then back. That's just her gig. She's in that's her adrenaline junkie. And she likes to name her bikes. So she's got a few bikes that she names as well. There you go. That's Mrs. Newcomb. Me, on the other hand, I'll just get on the bike and maybe go around the neighborhood at best. And I'll go really slow. One time we tried to bike together and it was no way. No, I said, no, you go up, you go ahead, you set the pace, I'll figure it out. Don't worry. I'll do that. All right. Anything else? Anything else over the weekend? All right. First time ever experienced on Friday, I did donate some blood. I was here at Park High, and student council went around and they solicit donors. And first time ever, though, I've been doing it since '85. And first time ever, I had a nurse not find the vein. Yes. And I think I was okay. I can handle it. The student was observing. I don't think he was doing so well. And it's like, just look away. We'll figure it out. It seemed like forever, but they figured it out. A pro came over and just like that. But Mr. President was giving me a little grief. I'm like, I don't need grief while we're trying to find a vein here. Come on. Let's go. So there we go. I don't know if that's a highlight or a low light. So Cold War is our focus. And for the next 2 weeks, if I can switch gears here, for the next 2 weeks, that is going to be our emphasis. And we'll take this now we want to see how it plays out regionally around the world. So we're going to take a look at some Cold War crises this week. And then next week, we'll look at how it comes to a conclusion. A lot of big talk about climate change and all that. And so how does climate change relate to the Cold War? Well, I had a conversation with my daughter and said that, the United States, we had a military base in Greenland. And here's where we thought, with Greenland and it's ice, it's frozen, at this military base, we have hazardous waste materials, and some of it can be nuclear waste materials. And once we abandoned the base, I want to say in the 1960s, we thought, okay, well, it's okay. It's in the ground. Greenland's frozen. Nothing bad's going to happen. Well, now with climate change, the climate in Greenland is changing as well. And now there potentially could be a hazardous waste oopsie. So we might have to go back to Greenland and clean it up. And it's a holdover from the Cold War. I think it was called Operation Operation Iceworm might have been the name of it. Could have it a little mixed up like that. So there we go. Climate change and how, and Cold War and how they are connected together. All right. So with that, yes.
How do we like use terms with countries like nuclear weapons?
So for instance, like Greenland, owned by Denmark, Denmark being part of NATO. So, and Greenland also, we're given the okay to put a military base in Greenland to help monitor the Soviets. And since the geography, proximity to the Soviet Union, it was very strategically important. Heck, you know, the past couple of years, we floated the idea out there, hey, what if we buy Greenland from Denmark? Denmark's no way going to give up Greenland by any means, but that has always been a possibility for the United States, not just in the past couple of years, but we've tried periodically to acquire Greenland. So, for a variety of reasons. And probably not for tourism, but more strategic. All right. So we've been looking at the Cold War last week. We kind of did some foundational pieces. You know, you looked at some events, you looked at some actions, and what we see here, a rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, and really, what is at the core of this rivalry? What's at the core? What's at the core of this rivalry? What do you got? Nuclear weapons. All right. I would say that might be an offshoot to it. Okay. I hear power. I see power. Yes. Power is a possibility. Yep. Difference in ideology. Difference in ideology speaks also to power, but difference in ideology. And then offshoot of it could be the nuclear weapons. Could be the economic interests. All that stuff connected with it. And, you know, when we are then going to look at the leaders, right? And the leaders play a part here as well. Right now, up to 1950, leader of the United States is who? Up to 1950, who do we remember is the leader of the United States? Truman. And up to 1950, the leader of the Soviet Union is Stalin. By 1953, we're going to have leadership changes. All right, in the Soviet Union, Stalin dies, and Khrushchev is going to emerge out of a power struggle, but you know, it's going to take some time. For the United States, who's going to take over for Truman? Eisenhower. All right, Eisenhower's going to. Now, you know, the fun fact about excuse me, we're not being built up. Okay. All right. Harry Truman could have run for re-election in 1952. Even though the term limit amendment had been passed, it would not have applied to him. He was the incumbent, so he could have ran for a second term for himself. He ran for Roosevelt in 45. Then he ran in 48 and won, and he could have run again in 52. He could have had the possibility of being there for almost, one could say, 12 years, if that would have happened. But he chose not to run again because there was some issues with him handling of the Cold War and Korea and all that. My point is, with these new leaders, brings new action and new ideas. And you would think, because Truman and Stalin are pretty much hardliners and setting the tone, that maybe things would change. And in the 1950s, it did kind of give this idea of a détente, all right? A little warming of relations. You know, the world leaders, Khrushchev and Eisenhower, they've met periodically, so it seemed like things were going to be fine. But what we see in the 1950s is almost the opposite. Our nuclear arsenals in both countries expand. Our foreign policy gets a little bit different. There's a little bit more flexibility in the foreign policy and how approaching different areas and what is the main focus. But we also see in the 1950s these regional crises that pop up. And under normal circumstances, they probably would have just been localized and regional. But because it's the Cold War, it's going to get hot and heavy, and you know the Soviet Union and the United States is going to be there. And we're going to play a role, active or behind the scenes role. So yes, it'll continue in Europe, and sometimes even behind what we'll call the Iron Curtain, but it'll also occur in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia is where this is going to play out. And so we're going to be looking at that this week here. Now, to kind of set the tone of it, we got to go back to Germany. And I have said, you know, why does it seem like Germany, we keep coming back to Germany, and it's geography-wise and it's divided. So in 1958, Germany, and more specifically Berlin, is going to become the center of a Cold War crisis. All right. And so I got a little video clip here that's going to show us how the wall is going to be ultimately built and what goes behind it. You know, what goes into building this wall, both at home in East and West Germany, but also internationally as well. And then the impact on individuals there. You know, as someone who grew up during the Cold War, this was the visible reminder of it. And so here we go. Got a little video clip here, so let's watch this in here. And think about, you know, the impact. Oh, I gotta do something here first. Share that. Think about, you know, how the rivalry is playing out, but then also what kind of impact do these type of rivalries
Berlin lay in ruins. Germany's devastated capital represented the evil that had been Nazi. The winners of the war divided Germany and its capital, Berlin, among themselves. The Soviet Union would occupy and control East Germany, a brand new country that promised to show the world why socialism was the best political system. West Germany, called the Federal Republic, would be occupied by the Americans, British, and French, who would establish a new democratic government that stood in direct opposition to communism. But what to do with Berlin itself wasn't so simple. The city lay deep within Soviet-occupied East Germany. The US and Britain refused to give it up, so an awkward compromise was reached. Berlin would be divided among the victors. The eastern half of the city would be controlled by the Soviets, the western half by the other Allies. That left West Berlin a non-communist island within a communist nation. Almost immediately, East Germans began to emigrate from their socialist nation to rebuild their lives in Western Germany. And many of them did it simply by crossing the border within the city of Berlin, from the east to the west. By 1961, East Germany had lost millions of its citizens through West Berlin.
And if you could get from East Germany into East Berlin and then from East Berlin into West Berlin, you could be resettled. And this was an option that between 1945 and 1961, about 2.5 million East Germans took. They didn't like life under communism. They didn't like the lack of prospects. They didn't like the lack of political freedom. and they voted with their feet.
This is Daniel Shore in West Berlin. This is a subway station. It is also an escape hatch.
Daniel Shore was the CBS News correspondent in Germany.
The number of people coming over was staggering. It was like a stampede in progress.
One refugee out of East Germany every 3 minutes. And for all we know, you could be looking at one now.
The continued loss of its labor force threatened East Germany's economic survival. Party Secretary Walter Ulbricht knew the hemorrhage of human talent had to be stopped. The question was, how?
What he wanted was a wall, a fence, a barrier down the middle of Berlin, making it impossible for East Germans physically to cross. And that would solve his problem. They couldn't go anywhere.
In public, Ulbricht denied he would ever seal the border.
Niemand hat die Absicht, eine Mauer zu errichten.
But in the summer of 1961, he secretly ordered a young, ambitious party official named Erich Honecker to head up a covert feat of engineering. Honecker commandeered barbed wire and concrete to be stashed in and around Berlin. Then, on a summer Saturday night, while Berliners were on vacation, he sprang the trap. On August 13, 1961, Berliners woke up to a city cut in two.
And by 6 o'clock in the morning, it was all done.
On the Bernauer Strasse, in the north of Berlin, the border closure created an odd situation. The doors of apartment houses opened onto West Berlin, but people who lived inside the buildings were East Berliners, and now they would no longer be allowed to use their front doors. Elke Rosin was a 16-year-old East Berliner who lived in an apartment on Bernauer Strasse. 4 days after the border was sealed, Elke's father gathered the family together.
It was in the late afternoon. My father, my parents told us about 1 hour earlier that we wanted to escape, and so we had to find some things to take with us. We put it in boxes and in some bags, and that's me when I was running.
For Elke and her family, escape meant dashing out the front door of their building and crossing the street to safety before the East German police could snatch them back. While her father locked the apartment door to keep the police from following, then leapt from the window. They were lucky they left when they did, and lucky they lived on the first floor. The border guards soon caught on, and others on Bernauer Strasse had a much harder time.
Yeah, many people lost their life, because of this strange situation.
Within weeks, all the windows and doors on the street were bricked over.
Something I had never seen before, and very few people have seen before, is to see a city cut through a center. It is really awful.
In mid-October 1961, 2 months after the border closure, the Americans in West Berlin decided to test the resolve of the East Germans and their Soviet masters. An American official from West Berlin challenged the East German border guards by refusing to show his papers at the crossing, and a dangerous standoff began.
Very soon, tanks appeared on the other side, Soviet tanks. And then for a while at Checkpoint Charlie, You could see American and Soviet tanks head to head. I went and stood between the tanks. And looking at my camera, I said, look at this picture. This could be a picture of the way World War III starts.
The whole world watched Berlin for a tense 48 hours. Then, after delicate negotiations between Moscow and Washington, both sides backed down. The standoff at Checkpoint Charlie was the last time U.S. forces openly opposed the Soviets to the Berlin Wall. It took Berliners months to absorb the reality of living in this divided city. But no one dreamed it would take 28 years to knock that barrier down. As the reality of the wall sank in, Berliners on both sides made their accommodations. In West Berlin, platforms were built alongside the wall so divided families could at least see one another. One of those waving from the west was a young father named Rudolf Mueller. He had been working in West Berlin the day the border was closed. His wife and 2 boys were stuck in the east.
So, after considering the options, at some point, we decided to dig a tunnel to get my family over here.
Mueller knew there was an idle construction site in West Berlin right next to the wall. With the help of his brothers and some friends, he began a small tunnel that would end in the basement of an apartment house across the street in East Berlin.
The tunnel itself began over here, behind that construction fence. Went down 2 meters and then right across, right here. Here where you see that indentation in the ground, there's that tunnel underneath. It was never secured. And we heard the border patrols on the sidewalk, so we had to be incredibly quiet.
They dug every night for 3 weeks and finally broke through into the apartment house basement on the east side of the wall. Mueller climbed out to get his family and another couple he had promised to help and bring them back to the tunnel. It all should have gone smoothly, but almost immediately, one of the East German border guards challenged them.
Right here is where the guard was standing. He saw us coming, and he yelled, "Stop! Where are you trying to go?"
Only years later did Mueller figure out that he may have been betrayed, that the other couple he was helping escape were in fact agents of the East German secret police. But the guards didn't know. Mueller was armed.
He raised his weapons slightly. I was watching him. I couldn't keep my eyes off of him. And he yelled loudly, "Stop! Where are you trying to go?" I was shocked. My hair was standing on end. I was so afraid. I turned around and said to my wife, "You keep going. Don't stop. Don't stop. My brothers are on the other side of the wall, and they're waiting for you." So I turned around. Right around here, and over there, where that line is in the asphalt, that's where the border guard was. He looked at me. I'll never forget. His face was all white from the excitement. "Where are you trying to go? Show your papers." And because my wife and my children kept going, he felt provoked, or whatever. He raised his machine gun and screamed this time, "Your wife and children have to stop, or I'll shoot." I tried to block his view, but when I saw the barrel of his machine gun, I I had a gun myself. That's when it happened. I thought, you have to shoot, or he shoots your family. He was standing there with his weapon up, and I shot.
The guard died, whether from Mueller's one shot or the hail of bullets let loose by other guards. No one knows.
It was a long time ago, but every time I talk about it, I still get chills up and down my spine. I never expected anything like this. It was horrible. Horrible that a young person had to die.
Desperate escape attempts became commonplace, and many succeeded.
In Berlin, escaping East Germans punched holes in the wall of shame with homemade bombs and trucks.
Others didn't. About 1 year after the wall went up, 18-year-old Peter Fechter and a friend made a run at the fence near Checkpoint Charlie. Fechter's friend made it over, but the guard's automatic weapon fire caught Peter in the leg as he scaled the fence, and he slipped back to the ground. The bullet had severed an artery.
West Berliners hear his cries, but are helpless. Communists who can help wait until Peter Fechter bleeds to death, then carry him away.
The GDR authorities issued new orders that anyone wounded while attempting to escape be removed from public view immediately. And they beefed up the wall, making it higher, broader, longer, until it extended 96 miles surrounding West Berlin, and in most places, it was 12 feet tall. But that was how it looked from the west, the free side. East Berliners saw it differently.
If you were in East Berlin and you walked towards the border with West Berlin, if you were in a park or a street or whatever, you would come up against a wall right in the middle of the street with a warning sign, often nothing much more than that. If you then climbed that wall, went over and dropped down, you would find yourself between 60 and 90 yards from West Berlin. And not just that, immediately in front of you was what they called the security border fence. This was a wired fence about 8 feet high, strengthened at the bottom so you couldn't crawl underneath. You had to climb it. And when you climbed it, you set off an alarm. You might, if it were night in certain parts of the border, also set off an automatic searchlight that would start sweeping the area.
Watchtowers stood every few hundred meters, manned by heavily armed soldiers.
They would know there was somebody trying to cross the security fence. You're over the security fence, sirens have started to go, the guards have probably started shouting out warnings and are preparing to fire if necessary.
The next obstacle to freedom was the death strip, a no-man's land with carefully raked sand designed to show footprints, and dogs on long leashes that would catch up with even the fastest runner. Some of it was covered by automatic machine guns rigged to tripwires.
Only then, only after you had managed to get across the death strip without being shot, savaged by a dog, did you reach what they called not the wall at all, not what tourists in West Berlin would call the wall, but what they called the border marker.
Finally, 90 yards from the first innocuous fence, this was the 12-foot-high concrete barrier the Westerners saw, topped with a cylinder of smooth cement that made it nearly impossible to grip.
And if you manage to get over that by some miraculous method, then you are in Berlin. How many people managed that? The answer is hardly anybody. People got through on trucks, they dug tunnels, they flew over it, they went round it, they used false papers. But very, very few people in the 1970s and 80s managed to get through not the Berlin Wall, but the multiplicity of walls that made up the Berlin Wall between East and West Berlin.
Just a wall, there's layers and layers to it. So you see that clip here on the Berlin Wall. Why are the East Germans doing what they're doing? Why did they do it? Why'd they have to?
If people were leaving, that's not much of a good sign for communism or the state of East.
Okay. And these people leaving, they're, in some ways, they are the going to be the backbone of a new society that Walter Ulbricht, or in German, Walter Ulbricht, wants to create, the socialist paradise. So he's going to have to do it, and ultimately it is the Berlin Wall. For the Soviets, they're not so pleased. Khrushchev is the one who says, fine, Walter, you go ahead and you do what you got to do. It's not something that they want to do as well, because it does, in some ways, represent a failure of their way of life, an indictment in some ways of it. Okay, how did the people become impacted by this wall? Yeah, families are separated. They took desperate measures, didn't they?
What happened to the train?
Eventually the train stops. So whether it's the elevated train or the subway, all that stuff is going to come to conclusion as well. And since you brought that up, I had a classmate in high school. Her father was from East Berlin, and when the wall was going up, her father, was much younger than him and his family. They got out of East Berlin through the subway tunnels. They had not concrete those in. They hadn't created the barricades yet. So you saw that there were some ways in which people were able to get through besides just going over that wall. Through buildings that were still like right there on the border, subways, trains, those, until all that eventually comes to a stop as well. And so eventually you got all these checkpoints that are going to be set up, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get out. So you saw that some individuals were successful and some were not successful in trying to get through it. But here, when we look at, as a result of putting up that wall, in many ways, it did, after those first couple of years of tension. After that, one would say it was rather calm. And other events around the world were taking away, were becoming more of the spotlight. Even though there's no peace treaty that had ever been signed, there was differences, but it did seem like the wall had some closure to the issues. Many did not think that opening the wall was ever going to be a possibility. But the events of the mid-'80s is going to help be that catalyst to open up that wall. All right, so that's an example of a Cold War crisis. We need to take a look at some more. So let's go to Schoology. There's a folder that says Cold War Crises Activity. If you opened it up, it's got a lot of handouts, which is going to be important here to help you with this assignment. It's called Cold War Crisis Activity. I actually opened up earlier, so you might have looked at it. And it's going to look something like this. And you'll be able to work with a historical buddy on it, but we got to make sure that we are social distancing and all that stuff with it. And so what we see between 1945 all the way up to 1985, and we can even say all the way to 1991, that the Cold War is going to go regional. And the rivalries is going to become escalated, and the tension between the superpowers is going to be there. There's a direct and indirect involvement of the superpowers, but we got a series of proxy wars, all right? And it's very well possible that you have family members had engaged in some of these proxy wars. For my family and my wife's family, the Korean War stands out, and as well as the Vietnam conflict. So you can work with a historical buddy or solo. So a historical buddy, you and another person. There are 4 regions. In each of the regions, you'll see a list of Cold War crises. Any of these, if we were taking the IB exam, would appear on it. But so you have 4 regions. You need to pick 3 of them. So right away, you need to decide, are you going to go to the Americas, Africa, Middle East, Europe, and Asia? All right, so you got to pick 3 of those 4. One of them's got to be left out. Then you choose one crisis from each of the regions. So if you do the Americas, perhaps maybe Cuba, because that's the Cuban Revolution there. The Cuban Missile Crisis is in there as well. So it's a combo there. You know, Africa and the Middle East, perhaps maybe it is Afghanistan. And take a look at how the Soviets are going to try to have a go with Afghanistan. It is amazing, though, you can think Afghanistan has been in some ways in a state of conflict since 1979 up to present. That's a lot of years of being in conflict. Europe, there's a variety of them. Not only do you have like Berlin there, but you have Hungary and Czechoslovakia attempts to crack open that Iron Curtain. And then in Asia, you have Korea and Vietnam. All right, and if you notice the Vietnam here, the years is 1954 to 1975. So we're looking at realistically Eisenhower all the way up to Gerald Ford, and looking at how our policy and how our involvement changed over time. You know, in some ways, we go from just being simply having advisors there to full game on, back to having advisors. All right, whatever you do. So first thing you do is you got to figure out, am I working with someone? Second thing is you got to figure out what regions. Third thing is you got to figure out which crises in the regions. And then the last thing is, what is my finished product going to look like? We got all week to work on this. All right, this is going to be our focus for this week. Nothing new is going to be thrown at you. This is our focus. And so you have 4 choices, and you want to see that each of these choices has some stipulations to it. Whatever the case here is, like, you know, if you do a newspaper, we're looking at least 9 articles, because you got three crises, but there are 3 big topics here for each of the crises that you have to address. Okay, brochure, newscast, or social media posts. All right, but be sure that you take a look at what is expected for it. Whichever project you choose, though, the following information needs to be required: the causes, the conflict, and the significance. And here, usually the significance is how is it for that particular country, but then how does it change the Cold War itself? All right. The conflict, just take a look at the scope of it. Who's being involved here? Is it the United States directly, or is it the Soviets directly? Who also is in there? How does it play out? Is this a conventional war? Is it a non-conventional war? Vietnam's an interesting one. Afghanistan. Cuba are all examples of guerrilla wars. Most of these in some ways have a guerrilla element to it. Of course, the causes can be more than just the United States and Soviets checked off at each other. Again, it could be something local. All right, and lastly, we got the BHQ here. You need to just pick one of the 2. One of the 2 here to focus on. All right, so you take a look at that. Summative piece here. We're 30 beautiful points. Due Friday, 11:59 p.m. All right. Can be done electronically, can be done on paper. All right. Can be done electronically, can be done on paper. For those here, if you want, I've got paper in the back that you can work on. In my head, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is all about the research and developing, and Thursday, Friday is putting this thing together. Okie dokie. Questions on this? Immediate questions? Yes. So if you did it on paper, you had ultimately I'd see it on Monday then. Okay, you did it on paper. Any other questions? Is there a Google Meet tomorrow? That was in the chat. No, there's not a Google Meet tomorrow. It's asynchronous. So for you, tomorrow will be working on this. You know, if you're working with Historical Buddy, you guys figure out. But we're busy with the ACT, and so we'll be proctoring it, so we will not be able to host Google Meets. So tomorrow is an asynchronous learning kind of day. All right, any other questions? What's that? It's ACT tomorrow. Okay. Oh, I'll check in with 916. I can't comment on that one. I would anticipate, yeah, you probably would be. All right, anyone else? So in terms of resources, again, all those handouts, depending on which one you pick, if let's say you do pick Guatemala, you know, you did see that I did have an attachment here somewhere, maybe not. Of course, I said Guatemala, and I didn't put Guatemala in there. I will find my Guatemala handout, and I'll put it in there. That's an oopsie, but if you did the Chilean crisis, all right, you take a look at Chile there, and that will be a good start. Of course, your textbook as well. Use those, and then if you still need additional information, GTS it. All right, if there are no questions, then I will cut you loose, let you work on it, and we'll go from there. All right, those at home, you can stay on or exit. Bye-bye.